Good. Well, welcome. I'd like to welcome everyone to the session today. We're going to be talking about the deep, dark secrets of unified messaging. And the title itself is somewhat misleading. It's a great title to get the attention of folks who are choosing sessions. So there you go. But it's a level 200. So we're not going into level 300 and level 400 unified messaging in the discussion. But that's OK. So for those of you, let me just ask the audience here, how many of you have deployed unified messaging in your environment already in some way? OK, very good. And how many of you, typically, in your environments, you handle both the IT admin exchange side to things, and you also handle your telephony or your PBX and things of that sort? OK, not too many. You know, a few, but not too many. I think that's the real reason why folks are not using unified messaging to start with. I think there's a fear factor there that they're actually stepping into the world of telephony, that they have to now get involved with their PBX, their IP PBX, and take on responsibility that perhaps they're not interested in taking on. They don't see the value in that, that they would take on this responsibility, that it would create a tremendous amount of stress, and there's no payoff for them in the back end. And so the goal here is to eliminate the fear of unified messaging, to show you that, look, it's not as scary as you think, and also to help to show you that unified messaging is not link. And that's what a lot of folks are confused about, too. When they think unified messaging, they think, oh, right, link, and that's where I replace my entire PBX infrastructure with link. And I've heard nightmare stories about that from an IT admin perspective. I don't want to get involved in that either. Now, not to take anything away from link, how many of you actually have worked with link and, how many of you have worked with link and are happy with it? Right, some hands went down, others' hands went up. OK, good. And it's a bit of a beast because for those that are not comfortable working in the world of telephony and the terminology and pools and so forth, this is all very new. And some just say, you know what, I'm just going to leave everything alone and I'll just stick to what I know. But that means that you're deploying, in the case of Exchange, it means you're deploying a server that has an extra solution in there that could save your company money, but maybe you're not taking advantage of it. And so that's what we're hoping to get over today. Get through the hump of, how scary is it? How difficult is it? And then if it's not so bad, which that's the hope by the end of the session, that you realize, hey, this isn't so bad, then how do you deploy it in a way that makes sense? What are some of the tips and tricks to deploying unified messaging that can get you through some of the pain points? So let me introduce myself. Some of you have seen me speak before, but I'll just introduce who I am. So my name is J. Peter Brzezzi. I'm a Microsoft Exchange MVP. Now, in addition to that, I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I like to pass a lot of certification exams. Did I mention I passed the one this morning? Yes, right, I did. Good to mention. I'm co-founder and CIO of a company called Clip Training, which provides Windows and Office training video clips, 3 to 5 minute training clips that are provided through an online portal. I'm also a technical author. I've written over a dozen books that have been sold internationally, and I speak for things like Tech Mentor, Connections, TechEd, and so forth. And I have the neat privilege next month of speaking at the World Partner Conference, which is pretty exciting for me. I've never been there before. Anybody ever been to the World Partner Conference? A few? Very good. So that's only part of my bio. Now, most folks you've gone and seen, they probably only have one slide for their bio. I happen to have two, right? Because I really want you to know about me. So Exchange is my passion. I want you to know why I'm standing up here. It's because for years, for 15, 16 years, I've been working with Exchange. I go back to 5.5. How many of you go back to 5.5? Wow, most of the room. How many go back further than that? Wow, half of the room. You guys are old. I'm still young. No, I'm just no, but we go back to 5.5 and earlier, and Exchange has changed so much. And for those of us that have got into Exchange at an earlier time, maybe you, like me, you were faced with the dilemma of, well, let's see, I can go into IIS, I can get into webs stuff, or I can go into SQL databases, or I can go into Exchange for messaging. And you found the other two unappealing, like I did, and then you said, I'm just going to stick with messaging. And so last 15 or so years working with Exchange, seriously the last 10 plus years, I've been an Exchange instructor, and you could see a bunch of other things up there. I'm the instructor for TrainSignal for Exchange 2010 and 2013 courses. I'm also the Enterprise Windows columnist for InfoWorld, so you're welcome to read my column as well. Now, at some point in the session, here's what we're going to do. I have a ton of stuff to give away. So one of the things I'm giving away is a copy of my book, Conversational Geek. We're going to raffle that off. If you have business cards, or if you just want to write your name down with an email, we're going to give this away at some point. Also, Train Signal, Exchange Server 2010 Unified Messaging Training we're going to give away at some point. And I've got a bunch of 30-day, right, Dana? 30 days of free IT training from Train Signal, little cards I can give away. We have like 100 of those. Good, yeah. So Dana's here. I'm not going to raffle those. We're just going to hand them out when the session's over. Also, and I'll mention this again at the end, after this, I'll be down at the eNow booth, and I'll be signing copies of Conversational Geek. The first 10 people to get there get the book for free. The eNow booth is kind of on the left-hand side of, if you're going into the conference, it's on the left-hand side where the booths are. All right. Everybody ready to move forward? Or anybody have any more questions about me? No? All right. I'm just checking. It's good to know. My assistant's going to walk around and get cards and email addresses or whatever. I also have a very special present for you at the end of this session that I'll show you in a little bit. So why is unified messaging scary? Well, you're dealing with a subject matter that was typically reserved for telephony experts, and you're looking at connecting your packet switch internal network to a circuit switch network. So you're thinking of things, you'll hear terms when you're reading up on unified messaging, terms like PSTN, trunk lines, PBX. And these are telephony terms that most people, if they're not in that world, they don't really have any idea of. So obviously, first key point there is don't be afraid to call for help. If you have a telephony person or team that you typically use now, you're still going to be using that person. So what exactly are you doing then with a unified messaging server? What is the whole purpose and goal of that? When it comes to 2013, if you're using, how many of you have deployed 2013? And are you using unified messaging with 2013? Not yet? Yes, you are? You are? Good, okay. So the feature set in Exchange 2013 is similar to previous versions of Exchange that had unified messaging. The primary changes here between 2010 and 2013 include the fact that unified messaging is merged into the mailbox role, so it's no longer a separate option. Right? You don't get to choose if you're going to install it. With Exchange 2013, when you install a mailbox role, it gets installed automatically. So for those who are deploying 2013, you already have it deployed as a role, per se, in your environment. And also, unified messaging supports IPv6. It supported it in the past with 2010, but you had to have IPv4 as well. So we'll reiterate this in a little bit. These are the top unified messaging features. I wanted it to be top 10, but I found 11, and I thought, OK, I don't want to shortchange you and drop one for the sake of having a 10 list. So for those of you who haven't deployed it, haven't looked at it, what happens when you deploy unified messaging in your environment? The only thing you're looking to really break, per se, is when calls come into your PBX, your IP PBX, and a person doesn't answer the phone, or the phone is busy in some way. Typically, at that point, things roll over to some kind of voicemail solution. What kind of voicemail solutions do you have? For those of you who aren't using unified messaging, what kind of voicemail solutions do you have? SureTel? OK, all at once. That all sounds like, and that's a great solution. I like that. No, raise your hand one at a time. Let's hear a few of these. What do you got? What is it? Avaya? Community existence? I heard that from few. Yeah? SureTel. OK. So good. So there is some kind of voicemail solution that you're using. And so what happens is there's this switch from your PBX, IP PBX, it switches over to this voicemail system. That's the piece that Microsoft wants you to break. Right? So unlike Lync, where you're replacing your whole system, all Microsoft is saying is, hey, you know what? If you have an Exchange environment in place already, especially with 2010 or 2013, all you need to do to eliminate the need for these other solutions is make it so that when the call comes in and the person is busy or there's no answer, instead of going to this other voicemail solution, we want it to point to your unified messaging server. Right? And then from there, what are you going to get out of that? How do you benefit from that? Well, it provides, for one thing, call answering. So Exchange can answer specific calls or all calls with auto attendance. And you can actually, especially for smaller businesses, this is a great way to make your business look a little bit larger than what it really is, because you can set up multiple auto attendants for multiple departments that may or may not exist, or may exist with one person being the head behind all of them. That's a neat trick. But at the same time, it works for your entire organization. You can set up multiple auto attendants with different languages established for each auto attendant. You can set it up with DTMF, where it's not voice activated, but it's handled through touch tone phones. So you can do a lot with the auto attendants. There's also Outlook Voice Access that's added. So this is the voice equivalent of Outlook Web App or Outlook in that you can call into the system and you can have your voicemails given to you through the system, or you can have your emails read to you with text-to-speech. You can have you have the ability to connect in with your calendaring and so forth, and you can make adjustments to your schedule all through your phone. So Outlook Voice Access is another great feature. There's Voicemail Preview, which is imperfect transcription, right? How many of you have seen this, right? Maybe you've seen it in demos. It's a lot of fun, actually. You can have a lot of fun with the Voicemail Preview feature because, look, it's best guess. That's what they say. Someone leaves a voicemail for you, and it transcribes it, and it's best guess as far as whether or not they do a good job with it or not. And typically, you're going to find a couple of words that don't work out. Now, the thing with that is, because I don't try to defend any type of transcription. Nobody does it perfectly. But what's really cool is, you know how somebody calls you and they leave you this long message, and all you want is a phone number, right? I just need the number. But they give you this long message, and then they say in the message, I'm sorry this is so long, which actually just adds to the length of the message. And then at the end, they go, oh yeah, I forgot, and here's the number, 555-1212. And you're like, what in the world? Well, the transcription may or may not pick up the number properly, but that's not the cool thing. If it does, great. But the cool thing is that within your Outlook or Outlook web app, you can select the part where the number is. And instead of now having to fish through a 5-minute voicemail by clicking through, because it typically comes through as an MP3 or some other format, you now can click the number and it goes right to that part of the voicemail. So it's a time saver, right? It's a frustration saver. So that's another feature, the voicemail preview. There's incoming fax support. With previous versions of the unified messaging solution, there was a built-in fax solution, but now it doesn't work that way. You have to go to an outside company, and you can provide the information within the fax support rules. So you still have to go with a third party on that, but it's provided so that if someone sends you a fax, it turns it into puts it into your inbox as a TIFF file. There are call answering rules, which allow your end users to actually specify their own rules. Play on phone. So obviously, if you have a message left for you, and now it's in your inbox, because it gives you this universal inbox, so now you have your voicemail right there, but you don't want to play it through your computer speakers. You might have people all around you. So you can actually say, play this, have this go to my phone, and it will play through your phone for you. Auto attendance, like we talked about, voice or DTMF. Language packs include grammar files, ASR vocabulary for commands, and so forth. Message waiting indicator, which may not sound monumental, but earlier releases didn't have the message waiting indicator. Right? Anybody remember when you had to have a separate third-party solution for the message waiting indicator? Any of you deploy it with, I think that was 2007, right? Didn't have the message waiting indicator. And then we have missed call voicemail notification texts. So that's cool, it'll text you. And protected voicemail, which mimics the asterisk private voicemail marking that you can establish with other voicemail systems. So it's actually a very robust solution. Now look, I'd love to say to you, hey, this is great, you should deploy it. I've never done it, but you should go and do it, right? The fact is that I've seen this deployed in smaller environments. And the largest environment that we worked with was a company that had 2,000 people in Tampa, where we deployed this with 2010 before you could virtualize it. Put it on a physical box, put it on its own physical box, and then once you could virtualize it, we were able to just swap it right over. It worked great. We had absolutely no problems with this. It is very rare for me to be able to get on a stage and tell folks that something like this, that especially that has complexity attached to it, is deployable with little to no issues. Right? Now, I'm sure those of you out there who have deployed it have had an issue or two. Right? I mean, that's obvious. I'm just saying that for me, it was an eye-opener that we were able to deploy it to 2,000 people without a problem. It ran perfectly. We flipped it from physical to virtual, still had no problems with it, and it's worked great ever since. Now, don't get me started when it comes to incorporating Link into that same scenario, because everything kind of broke when we did that. But that's another story. Unified messaging, I've been so impressed by it as a feature, and that's one of the reasons why I love talking about it and promoting it, because I feel like this is something that's built right in. And if you're paying for other solutions, or if you're just avoiding the management of this because you're not sure if it's going to work right, you're not really sure if this is your thing, you're making a mistake. It's really not that difficult. there are key elements on your side. Once the telephony side is all taken care of, the key elements on your side as the Exchange admin is the configuration of dial plans, IP gateways, message policies, and auto attendance, right? And this is something that Paul Robichaud said. Is Paul here yet, by the way? Okay, so don't ask me hard questions then. If Paul's not here, I don't want to answer any hard questions. So Paul said the service itself is largely a self-tuning black box with relatively few adjustments or settings for you to manage once it has been deployed. Right? Have you found that to be true as well? How many people have set this up, and once it's working, you set it, forget it? Right? Not as many as I'd like to see. Some of you have had some issues, huh? Well, that's great. We could talk about those. Let's move through and see how much time we have toward the end. Basic telephony terms that come into play include things like public switch telephone network, or PSTN, which when you think about this, this is the most widespread, robust communications network on the planet. It reaches every corner of the globe. And then we have trunk lines. Trunk lines come into your organization. They connect to a PBX or an IP PBX. And these are the things that folks are typically afraid of. But if we look at this, there are really three integration options. The next slide I'll talk about the last one. But you have a couple of different ways that you can integrate your existing PBX or IP PBX with your unified messaging solution. First of all, if you have a legacy PBX, thank you very much. If you have a legacy PBX that is on Microsoft's compatibility list, then you can slip in a voice over IP gateway, and that will handle the translation from the PBX to the unified messaging server. In the event you have an IP PBX, well, then you don't even need the voice over IP gateway. You can just go right with your unified messaging solution, and it'll work just fine. So this is where you don't really typically have to worry too much about what's happening from the PBX or PBX world out. And in fact, when it comes to that, you typically don't have to ask your telephony team to do much other than help you with a few settings, because you'll see some of the settings are a little bit unique, and they may not be within your world of vocabulary, and you might not know what to set them at, so you grab in your telephony team to help you. But other than that, you're just telling your telephony team, listen, we're not going to use this voicemail solution anymore. Point it off to our unified messaging server. So it's not even that much work on their part for them to do that. The third option is Link. Some deploy Link with just instant message and presence in mind. The company I mentioned in Tampa, they decided to do that initially because it was such a nightmare to get it to work. And this was actually Office Communication Server before Link. And then eventually they hired in consulting experts from Microsoft to come in and get it all to work properly. But others will merge Link with unified messaging. They'll include SharePoint in the mix. And this is all part of what Microsoft calls their unified communications and collaboration solution, where you have Exchange, unified messaging, and enabled, as well as SharePoint and Link all together. So again, I can't stress this enough, as far as being able to contact your existing telephony team or individuals in order to ensure that that stress that you're typically probably putting on yourself and what's typically holding people back from deploying is eliminated. So you have to make a careful analysis of your infrastructure. You have to plan carefully with your telephony experts. You have to rely on their expertise in order to make this work for you. And you might want to also seek out unified messaging specialists as well. Now, for some, that might be a little insulting. You might be sitting there thinking, I'm the specialist, I'm the expert, and that's great. But in other cases, you may be sitting here, and you got to remember, the audience here is diverse. Some of you may be in this session thinking, we would love to use this, but I don't have time to learn more stuff. I already have enough to learn, enough to do. I'm already understaffed. And now you want me to implement this unified messaging solution that really is only going to replace something that I already have that is already working, and we're just paying a little bit of extra money for it, so who cares? But I think that that's a mistake to think that way. Going forward, as IT admins, it's essential that we start looking at ways that we could save our company money, and that's how you're going to shine as an admin. The person that actually can save the company money. So when you have a solution that already exists and it's already built in, then that is a key thing to turn around and say, hey, we have something here. It can save us some money. It's going to take a little bit of configuration work, and it's not going to kill us in the end, but we'll save some money. That's how you shine. That's how you'll stand out. Let's talk a little bit about the actual pieces on the side. So forget about the telephony side for a little bit. Once you have things connected up, from a physical perspective, the things you're going to have to create, and we're going to work through an interactive lab in a little bit, you're going to have to create a dial plan. Now, what this does is it identifies a set of PBXs or IP PBXs that allows users to directly dial through common user extension numbers. Right? The extension numbers are typically already set up, and you typically just have to know what those extensions are and then work with it on the UM side. Nice to have Paul Rocha in the room. Thank you very much. Everybody give him a round of applause. It's all right that you're here late because I kept asking, is Paul in the room? Is Paul here? I knew who you're with. Exchange Goddess, yes? On the Twitter handle there, right? So with Exchange 2007 and 2010, you associate each server with a dial plan. But with Exchange 2013, this has changed because any 2013 unified messaging server can accept a call from any defined IP gateway on your network. Okay, so there's a little bit of a change. Some of you had said that you've already deployed with 2013. How many out there again? Just a handful? Okay. Yeah, and that's understandable. We all realize and appreciate that Exchange 2013 was released, RTM. It wasn't finished in the sense that you couldn't transition from your Exchange 2010 or 2007 environment, so we had to wait. We had to wait for service packs, and then once we got those service packs, we had to wait a little longer for the cumulative update. So it's really only now that we could say that it's a deployable solution. So that might, is that thunder? Oh, it's probably somebody with a cart walking by. So that might explain why there are so few deployments of it to date. But perhaps after this conference, you'll be going home and getting 2013 into your environment if you feel that it's right for your network. The other thing is the IP gateway. This represents your literal PBX or IP PBX. In Exchange 2013, it's fully IPv6 native. With 2010, as we mentioned a little while ago, we're only allowed IPv6 if you also had IPv4 present. But this has changed with some requirements that are connected to it. Hunt group. So this is a somewhat, I like what Paul says in his book. He calls it a somewhat archaic term. And when the PBX or IP gateway sends an incoming call to the server, the SIP invite includes the pilot number. The server that receives the call checks the pilot number to decide whether it matches the hunt group to which the server belongs. And so, if so, it answers the call. Now, most Exchange deployments just create a single hunt group, and this is created when you do the installation of your configuration of your dial plan and so forth, and they leave the pilot number blank so that any server can answer any call. But you don't have to keep it that way. You can make adjustments to it, and you can set this up to be a little more specific. Then you have mailbox policies. Now, these are similar. You're going to see, we're going to demonstrate all of this in a little bit. These are similar to other policies that you define within Exchange. The mailbox policy allows you to define settings for users who have enabled. And those settings are all of the features we just talked about. So whether it's Outlook voice access or voicemail preview, you can turn those things on and off at will for individual users or groups of users and so forth. So that's the beauty of the mailbox policy. Then you have the auto attendants, which allow you to establish a system for customized call handling through menu options handled by speech or DTMF input. And we're going to set up a couple of these as well. You can use multiple auto attendants to make it so that, let's say you have an auto attendant that's voice enabled. There's a couple of different ways this can work. So someone calls into the system, they're trying to work with the auto attendant, and how many of you have had trouble with an auto attendant not understanding you? Right? Everyone should kind of raise your hand. It's okay. It's okay. It happens to all of us. No matter how clearly we try to speak to the auto attendant, it somehow just doesn't get it. And it's like, I'm sorry, I can't understand you. Can you try that again? Now, the thing with Exchange Unified Messaging is that if you do this, I believe, 3 times, it'll flip over and it'll give you the option toward another type of input, DTMF, or dual tone multi-frequency. You don't have to memorize that. Just DTMF is fine. But you have to configure this auto attendant to be DTMF enabled. Okay? And you can also establish the auto attendant with DTMF to be to have its own dial-in number, because for those persons who already know that they're going to have a problem with the voice-enabled auto attendant, it would be nice to just skip that part. Right? It would be nice to skip the fact that it's going to say you have a problem and then eventually flip you over if you already know the dial-in number of the DTMF auto attendant. All right, so let's demonstrate this. We've talked about some of the different pieces to this. Now, how many of you have been in sessions where there's a little bit of a problem with the demo? Right? Everybody. Great. Okay. So this is what I wanted to avoid. Now, typically, when I give this session in Orlando, or close to home, that's where I'm from, I can bring in my server, my voice over IP gateway, multiple phone lines, and I love doing that demo. Calling from one phone to the other, and everybody gets a chance to see how this really works. And they can come up and play with it afterwards. But being that that wasn't going to happen for this show, I wasn't going to bring everything with me, and I don't necessarily trust the Wi-Fi connectivity to connect to my Exchange servers, no matter where they are, I decided to do something unique. Typically, what I would do in a session like this is I would record the demo. Right? Record a video, and then hit start and stop, and you'd get a chance to see it kind of jump through. In this case, I decided to create an interactive lab that would allow us to work through it. Let's see here. Control. Yeah, there we go. So I created an interactive lab that will allow us to work through the entire process as if we're working on a real Exchange server, right? With a couple of tweaks in play, just so that I don't have to do too much typing. So here you can see, when you're going to configure your Exchange server, you start things off. Oh, and by the way, the present that I'm going to give to everyone at the end is anyone who would like this lab, I'm going to give it to you. You just have to, if I have your email address, or if you want to give it to me afterwards, I'll just give you a link, and you'll be able to download this. It's just a simple 25 meg folder with an HTML file that you click called story.html. And once you click it, it opens up to this right within a browser. And so here, we'll log in. And on the left-hand side, you can see it gives the steps along the way. So you can follow those. At times, there's also call-out boxes to help you if you get a little lost. If you click somewhere that you're not supposed to click, it says it's incorrect. Please try again. Right. So under the EAC, the Exchange Admin Center, under the left column for features, we have unified messaging. We click that. From there, we have dial plans and IP gateways. Now, for those of you who are Exchange 2010 oriented, you might be wondering, where's everything else? Where are the auto attendants, and where's the policy? Well, that's actually now embedded within the dial plan. So not to worry, we'll see that in a moment. But we have dial plans and gateways. So to start with, we need to create our dial plan. We click the little plus sign. We provide a name. In this case, we'll call it TechEd. We give it an extension length. And then from there, we need, in our case, let's say we want 4-digit extensions. Depending on your environment, the number of extensions really will vary with each company. So then you have your dial plan type. If you select that, we have telephone extension, E.164, and SIP URI. Beyond that, and there's some instructions that come up on the side. We're going to leave it as telephone extension. Then we have the voice over IP security mode. You have SIP secured, unsecured, and secured. When you're doing this in a lab environment, it's easier just to leave all the typical easy settings. Telephone extension, unsecured. Unless you have specific instructions and you're doing it in a production environment, then you would have real solutions that you'd have to put in, and you'd have to give real dial plan types and voice over IP security modes. You can choose a language. If you only have one language installed, then it's only going to show you the one. And then you put in your country or region code, which in our case is 1. We click Save, and now we have the dial plan there. You might think, well, that was easy enough. Well, actually, when we come back to this, when we go in to edit it, you'll see that there's a lot more to that dial plan than just giving it a name and choosing a couple of settings. One of the nice things is that they allow you to at least create something first, and then you can go back and start making all the changes to it. That's definitely the case with the dial plans here. The next part of the process is to click the UMIP gateway. So to create a gateway, we click the plus sign. We give it a name. In this case, I'm just calling it Audio Codes IP Gateway, giving it an IP address. And then you have to associate the gateway with a dial plan. So you click Browse. And in our case, we only have the one dial plan, so that's easy enough. TechEd right there. We say OK. And we click Save. Now, just like I said, with all of these different settings, you have to go back in and you can make adjustments, and you'll see that there are more options involved. With the IP gateway, it's not so complicated. If you click the little pencil, which means edit. I'm telling you that because that's not, to me, none of these little icons are intuitive. You know how they're like, oh, this is the Metro interface. And I know, we're not supposed to call it the Metro interface. But let me just cue you in on something. If you call it the Metro interface, you're not going to be sued. Okay, the reason why they don't call it that anymore is because there was this lawsuit thing that came up. And so Microsoft said, oh, we'll have to switch and call it something else. But no one's going to sue me, so I can call it the Metro interface all I want. So And I don't find it all to be all that good. So hopefully they're going to change it and give me, I don't like all those little icons. I like when it says edit. That makes it nice and easy. The good thing about the web-based interface is that when you put your cursor over those things, it'll actually pop up and tell you what it is. So notice by going into the IP gateway settings themselves, when you go to edit, there are 2 additional settings that you can configure on the gateways themselves. The first is allow outgoing calls through this UMIP gateway. And the other is allow message waiting indicator. Hope that's coming through clearly enough. Well, so not much. There's not much to configure here. Now, the IP gateway is literally your visual representation within the Exchange Admin Center of what is existing out on your network, your literal gateway. So it's really not much to configure here. It's just a matter of saying, hey, here's the gateway, and here's the IP address or the FQDN for that gateway. And a couple of little checkboxes. Beyond that, if we go back to our dial plans and we click Edit, you see how it comes up with that little edit sign there? So this part of the demo, there was some moving of things, so we're just going to let it do that for us. So it moves the thing for us, and then ultimately we're going to click Edit under the mailbox policy here. Just to, hold on again. Edit. There we go. So we're just looking at the mailbox policy. Now, when you create your dial plan, it actually creates the mailbox policy for you. So that's convenient. And then you can create additional ones. So there's a default policy for the dial plan, and then you can go in and just click the plus sign and create additional policies if you'd like. Now, from here, you can see some of the options. And again, it's all of those features that we talked about. It's just little checkboxes. You can turn them on or off, whether or not you want to allow voicemail preview, allow users to configure call answering rules, allow message waiting indicator or not, voicemail access, missed call notifications, and so forth. And then there's the allow inbound faxes, where you put in your partner's fax server, the URI information. So that would come from the third-party fax solution that you're working with. And so you'd put that in the policy as well. In addition, if we go to message text, so there's text that's already there. When you enable a person for unified messaging, there's default text that Microsoft already has in there, whether it's enabling them or when a PIN is reset for Outlook voice access, or when a user receives a voice message, or when a user receives a fax message, there's default text. Some people, and I'm not judging anyone, but some people are micromanagers. They really want to get right down into every little thing and make a change to personalize it in some way. And so you have the ability to go in and you can add your own customized text for voice, fax, and email messages. Maybe there's policy information that you need to include. Maybe there's some kind of disclaimer for your company that you want to make sure is included in these messages. Whatever the case, you can do it right through here, through the policy. You've got your PIN policies here. So you can determine the maximum PIN length, the PIN recycle count, whether or not you want to allow common PIN patterns or not, the enforcing PIN lifetime, number of sign-in failures before the PIN resets, and the number of sign-in failures before lockout. Under that, you have dialing authorization, and you can see that you can select the type of calls to authorize for users of this mailbox policy, whether it's calls in the same dial plan or not, calls to any extension, and then you can configure additional dialing rule group information. And then we have protected voicemail. So from here, you can configure things like whether or not you want messages protected from unauthenticated callers or authenticated callers, and you can determine things as far as requiring play on phone for protected voice messages and so forth. A lot of these features, you might be thinking, we already have these features. But again, you're going to have to consider, do you have them at a cost? What's it costing you to have the solution you currently have? And does it provide for all of these features? Would this be a more robust solution in some cases? And would it be the kind of solution that you'd feel better about controlling, being that it is something that works off of your Exchange environment? Plus, it snaps right into that whole universal inbox idea so that now you have everything coming into one place. All right, we'll close this out. All right, so in addition to the policy itself, we created the dial plan, but we didn't actually configure the dial plan. Notice all we have here is the name, the dial plan type, and the extension length. We added a few extra things when we created it, but we can go back at any time and make adjustments to our dial plan. So when you go to configure it, you can see there's all these different settings here on the left. So you have the General tab where you can change your security mode if you'd like. We have dial codes. This is where you might need some extra information from your telephony folks as far as what do you use for you probably know what you use for an outside line, but international access code, national number prefix, and some of these other settings here. Outlook voice access settings. So there's a default greeting as well with Outlook voice access. They're just a typical greeting, a computerized female voice, and it just welcomes you and it gives you all the typical information. But you can change that. You can actually record other people's voice, maybe the president of your company's voice asking certain things or giving some information, and you can change these voice access greetings. You can have a default one and your informational announcements, which you can set up an access number or multiple access numbers for. Under settings, a lot of people ask me, how do I change the audio codec? That's actually on the dial plan. Under settings, you see there's an option here for audio codec. And if we open that up, you can see you could choose GC11, WMA, GSM, MP3. What do most of you folks use? MP3? Anybody use one of these others?
In 2007, we used G711 because that way it would play on a BlackBerry.
Oh, interesting. Okay, very good. But nobody uses BlackBerries anymore, so that's all. Now it's all BYOD, right? Anybody can use whatever they want. That's great. Did we ever think we were going to see a world like that? Right? It's like my worst nightmare, right? Do whatever you want, sure. And now the big thing is also, instead of just bring your own device, bring your own services. Hey, whatever services you want. Yeah, sure. Just do whatever you want. You know? You don't need me. All right, so you can change the codec here, for the audio codec, right within the settings for the dial plan. Some other options here, timeout and retries and so forth. We've got dialing rules. And, right around now, especially when I hit dialing rules, this is a perfect time to do a raffle. I'll tell you why. Because, this is somewhat dry. You're going through settings and things. It's good for you to see it. It's good for you to know that it's there. And we're going to go through all of the little buttons. But just to break things up a little bit, let's see if I can give something away. All right. Who's going to win something today? All right, I'm giving away Conversational Geek. It's a gift from Clip Training to Josh Sherlock. Josh, welcome. Please come up. Grab the book. We can applaud. Don't be haters. Everybody applaud. Go ahead. There you go. So I'll tell you the story behind this book. So I'm sitting on the couch watching Dancing with the Stars. Don't laugh. I know you watch it too, right? Don't laugh. Watching it with my wife, if that counts, if that makes any, she was watching it, and I was lifting weights, and building something with wood and a saw. No, so we're watching Dance with the Stars, and out comes Steve Wozniak. Now, how many of you saw that with Steve Wozniak? You were willing to admit it. See, others watch it too. That's nice, right? Okay, so Steve Wozniak comes out, and I look up and I go, "Do you believe this, honey? This is Steve Wozniak." She goes, "Who?" I said, Woz, the Wizard of Woz, Apple I, Apple II. She says, "Steve Jobs?" And I said, no. This is the guy, the mind behind Steve Jobs that actually made everything work, until he went crazy. So she says, "He's not a very good dancer." I said, "He's not supposed to be. He's Steve Wozniak." And he really wasn't a very good dancer. I mean, the guy just really could not pick up the tango. But that's a different story. So he gets voted off early. We don't see him again until the finale. And then months later, we're watching The Big Bang Theory. Anybody watch that? Right? Is that okay? All right, very good. There you go. I got you back on my side now. So we're watching The Big Bang Theory, and it's the episode where Steve Wozniak is on, and Sheldon goes to meet him, and he's very excited. And my wife looks over and says, "Hey, honey, there's that guy." I said, "It's Steve Wozniak." She says, "The guy from Dancing with the Stars." I'm like, no, not the guy from Dancing with the Stars, for the love of God. And right then and there, I decided, you know what, not just her, but a lot of folks, they don't know who Steve Wozniak is. They don't know who Paul Allen is. They don't know, Vint Cerf or Robert Kahn or TCP/IP or, and I'm not talking about the deep nitty-gritty stuff that we know. I'm just talking about just the history, just the basics, right, the trivia. And so I decided to write a little book about all of those things, the history of the operating system, the history of the Internet, just how to do binary code, which is really great at parties, like figuring out binary code, decimal to binary, binary back to decimal, decimal. Really, for those of you who are, who are single, this is really a great party thing to do. Yeah, if you want to remain single, right? Single, right? So anyway, so I wrote a book called Conversational Geek. So I wrote a book called Conversational Geek in 7 days. And the idea was to really just kind of fill all this in. Even little things, like stuff like when we write an email and we use an @ symbol, right? Why do we do that? What's the @ symbol for? Who invented that, right? There's something for you to look up. Who invented the @ symbol? Does anybody know off the top of your head? Well, it's in my book, Conversational Geek in 7 days. Go buy it. Okay. So going back to this, right? We laughed a little bit. Good. We're back now. We're looking at dial rules and dialing authorization. We have, let's see, transfer and search here. Oh, we just here. Dialing authorization. Here's where, again, through the dial plan itself, you can configure things like allowing calls within the same dial plan or to any extension. And then transfer and search, whether or not you're going to allow the ability for callers to transfer to other users, to leave voice messages without ringing the user's phone. All these little tiny things. Now, a lot of this stuff is already decided for you. Your existing voicemail system probably has a lot of these features already configured. And so you really just want to mimic that probably, unless you feel like, well, I need to make some changes and you want to really get your hands into that. But for the most part, try to mimic what you already have, right? OK. So that's the dial plan settings. We're just going to scroll down to the bottom now here. And you can see down at the bottom you have that hunt group. But now we're going to take a look at adding auto attendants. So we have no auto attendants by default. And that's interesting because here when we created the dial plan, it created the message policy. We had to go in and create the gateway, but it didn't do anything when it comes to auto attendants. So this is something that you don't necessarily have to configure, but most want to. So you go in, you click the auto attendant, and you need to first provide a name. And then from there, you would create this auto attendant as enabled, set the auto attendant to respond to voice commands if that was your goal, is to have it voice enabled. And then you could provide an access number for that auto attendant so that folks can dial the auto attendant directly. In this case, we're just going to save it at this point. And so if you wanted to make it so that now that auto attendant, because again, those are just 2 or 3 settings, but when we go back in, you'll see there's a lot more to that auto attendant. But if you wanted to make it so that the auto attendant has a DTMF failover, then what you do is you create a second one, give it a name, in this case DTMF AA, and create this auto attendant as enabled. But in this case, you do not set the auto attendant to respond to voice commands. Right? You leave that one unchecked. You could also provide an access number because, like I said, you might want folks to be able to call right into it so they don't have to deal with getting 3 failures and then flipping over. We click Save. So now we have these 2 auto attendants. And then we go back to the first one, and we go and we edit. Is this a cool interactive lab or what? Right? Look, it does everything. So we go back and we edit it. Notice this little piece down here where it says, use this auto attendant when voice commands don't work correctly. We click Browse. And we want the DTMF auto attendant. And we say OK. All right. And so really, that is the key to that. It's really that easy when it comes to making sure that there's a failover auto attendant that's DTMF. As far as some of the other settings that we have under the auto attendant here, we have our greetings. We can change the greetings. There's business hour greetings, non-business hour greetings, and so forth. And if you're thinking, well, how do they know what my business hours are? There's actually a business hours tab where you can configure business hours. You can configure your holiday schedule. And everyone's a little different on that. So you might have a holiday in your country that's not in someone else's country. So you can configure that all out for yourself here as far as what's business hours and what's not, and when your holidays are. Then you have menu navigation. This is cool because here's where you can specify the options offered to callers. For example, when callers press 1, you transfer them to sales, press 2 for marketing, press 3 for legal, and so on and so forth. So you can configure all of those different prompts and keys here for both business hours as well as non-business hours. Then you have your address book and operator access. Here's where you can configure things like operator extensions and so forth, being able to transfer to an operator during business hours or not. And again, every company is different. There may not be an operator to transfer over to in some companies, so then you would not select that. And then dialing authorization, again, whether it's to calls in the same dial plan or to allow calls to any extension. So this is it. This is the whole point of this session, is to take the fear out of unified messaging. Really, you've seen all of the settings there, really. That's it. You've got your dial plan. You've got your IP gateway, which you saw. That was really nothing. That was just pointing off towards the physical box, a couple of little check boxes. You've got your policy. You've got your auto attendants. That can get a little more involved depending on how much you want to sprawl those auto attendants out there. And then you've got your hunt groups, which typically folks just leave alone so that it just works without you getting your hands involved unless you want to create additional ones. Now what? Well, from here, we close this out. We have this all configured. From the recipient part, if we look back at recipients up in the features pane here, you can select a user. We'll select Jane user. And then over here on the right, this is, they don't call it the actions pane, but we'll just call it actions pane for now. And then you can see here, unified messaging disabled. We click enable. Let's move that. You like that? That's good. You're paying attention. My little call out. The funny thing is that I did this demo several times, and every time it opens up off to the right of the screen there. And it's like it's not aware that it was at 1024 by 768 when I recorded it. I don't know. Why it opens up off the side, I have no idea. So the first thing you do, you grab a user. And of course, you can use PowerShell for this, and you can grab users and configure their policies and so forth. But here, we grab the user, we click Browse, and we select the policy. Oh, sorry. Select the policy, click OK. Click Next. And then from here, you can indicate their extension, whatever extension it is that they have. In this case, we're using 4-digit extensions, so I'm going to give Jane 2002. We have PIN settings. We can automatically generate a PIN, and then that PIN will be put right in their inbox when they get their confirmation email that unified messaging has been enabled for them. Or you can type a PIN with a minimum, in this case, 6 digits, because that's the minimum length that we have. And once you have that in, you can choose, you could say require the user to reset their PIN or not, and then click Finish. And congratulations, we've completed this interactive lab. Very good. So again, for anyone who wants to play around with this, you're welcome to it. As far as for those who are curious as to how I created it, I'm working with a tool called Articulate. I don't work for them, so I don't get any residual benefits from telling you that. But it's a really cool tool. It's something that's new. I mean, folks use Camtasia for recording videos, or they might use some other tool for that. This was a little different. It's a super expensive tool. It's like $1,300 for the tool, but there's a 30-day free download. So it's really great for, you can pretty much record what you're doing as if you're making a video, and then it flips it into something like this, and then you go back and tweak it. So yeah, hopefully, this, for me, certainly this eliminates a lot of stress in terms of whether or not the demo was going to work or not. Articulate, yeah. Mm-hmm. He's laughing. He's like, that's what the guy's going to write down? Articulate. That's great. I'm really happy. That's the thing. This is not just about unified messaging, but you're learning all sorts of other things. OK, so now let's talk. What is this guy laughing about? You tell me later. Are you still drinking? Are you still drinking hurricanes from last night? Is that? How many of you have tried a hurricane since you've been here? Right? They're kind of sweet, huh? Right? I like that, actually. I'm kind of a blue drinker myself. Anything blue, I'll order. I'm sharing a little too much with you folks. I really am. A little bit too much, but that's OK. That's all right. So let's talk a little bit about topology planning. So I figured a lot of folks are still working with 2010, so I wanted to include a little bit of 2010 stuff in here, too. So when it comes to topology planning, you need to have both the mailbox server role and the hub transport server role in the same Active Directory site as the unified messaging server. Now, you don't have to worry about that. If it's for me, tell them I'm busy. You don't have to worry about that, unless it's important, and then I'll take it. With unified messaging in Exchange 2013, you don't really have to worry about that because when you deploy a mailbox server, it has the transport services as well as unified messaging all built and baked right in. So, but when it comes to topology with Exchange 2010, you do have to make sure these pieces are in play. Now, you can place all of this in each physical site with a PBX, or you can simply add an IP gateway and place the servers up in the main site or headquarters, and then keep the server centralized. So kind of a graphical look at this. Here's one example where you have everything in the headquarters, right? I don't know if you can see all the different types of servers. Is there a laser pointer? Oh, yeah, OK. So this is just a good way to show you. You got your server, your mailbox server, your hub transport server, all right in here. And basically, we're using gateways in each of the branch offices, right? And you can do that. You have to make sure that there's not an excessive amount of latency in between each of these different sites. What is it? Is it, Paul, I'm going to call on you now. Is it 300 milliseconds? 250 milliseconds. I was close. All right, so this is another way to do it. You can deploy it in each site, and you can have the unified messaging server actually literally in each site. But again, if you're going to deploy it, you're going to have to make sure you have all of those extra server pieces in play too. So that may not be what you're looking for. And the same is true with 2013. Again, you don't necessarily need to put a server in each and every branch office in order to get unified messaging features. So if you're saying, you know, I get my email from a headquarters location, and I'm in a branch location, and we get all our email from here, so I probably can't use unified messaging. That's not true. You can use unified messaging. You just need to make sure that within each office that you have your PBX or IPPBX, that you have some way of connecting to the server and that the latency is not too excessive. Virtualizing unified messaging. For those, how many of you have virtualized your UM role? Okay. So how many of you used UM before you could virtualize it and then you had to flip over? Right? A few? Okay. So it was a frustrating thing. You know, a lot of folks asked, why is it I can virtualize every role in the book, you know, but not the unified messaging server role? What was the problem? And there was a lot of back and forth on that as far as whether or not all the pieces for unified messaging were certified for virtualization and so forth. And so then eventually they said, okay, we released the service pack, and now you can virtualize. With Exchange 2010 Service Pack 1, you can virtualize the unified messaging server role. And everyone said, well, that's great. All that really meant for most folks is that now they were being supported for what they were already doing. Right? Right. So, and that's fine. And it was working fine. I mean, the first version with first version of Hyper-V, it didn't work out so great. And with 2007, not as good. But by 2010, it worked great. So then they came out with guidelines. And they were like, OK, so here are the guidelines if you're going to virtualize the unified messaging server role. You have to install the unified messaging server role on a 64-bit edition of Windows Server 2008 R2. This was in the guidelines, right? And this was the funny thing about that, because and this was before Service Pack 3, where you could install it on 2012 as well. But the funny thing about these guidelines was that you couldn't install the role on anything other than a 64-bit edition of anything. So the fact that they included that in was a little kind of redundant. But fair enough. And then the second thing was that the unified messaging server role must be the only role installed on that virtual machine, and it may not be combined with any other role on the same virtual machine. OK. All right. So that's another stipulation. So now I have to have, you know, a server completely dedicated to the unified messaging server role. OK. The next was the virtualized machine must have at least 4 CPU cores and at least 16 gigabytes of RAM. OK, so now I have to actually like double the amount of RAM that you typically use for my mailbox server role, for the unified messaging server. That just seemed a little crazy, right? So one theory that was posed by a genius of a man, he said, well, it's possible that they never really wanted you to virtualize this role in the first place. And so they finally acquiesced and said, OK, you can virtualize it. But then they made the stipulation so ridiculous that, you know, you wouldn't virtualize it anyway. But again, a lot of folks did, and if you went below the 16 gigabyte limit, you were fine, you know, depending on the amount of volume that was coming in. As far as virtualizing with 2013, it's supported, plain and simple. Why? Because the CAS role and the mailbox role are supported for virtualization, and the mailbox role has automatically built in. Now, some folks have complained about that. They've said, you know, I don't want built in. I'm not going to use it. I don't want it as part of my services. It does really minimal impact if you're not using it. It's a service. If you're not using the service, it's minimal impact on the server. So don't stress about it if it's there. Just if you're not going to use it, don't touch it. The same rules apply for both roles as far as the mailbox and CAS role. And there's a link here as far as you can look up and see virtualization of the role. But typically, what's interesting is they pretty much ignore this role completely. They don't give a lot of actual data in terms of virtualizing this role and what you might have to do differently. And I thought that's odd, considering they gave so much information on the last one. Like, you have to have 16 gigabytes of RAM. It has to be on its own server. And not much has changed in the feature set, so I don't really know why it's now not such a big deal. As far as the architectural changes with 2013, the role is now built into the mailbox role, as we said. The CAS now runs a new service called the Microsoft Exchange call router service. And it's microsoft.exchange.callrouter.exe. Now, this accepts calls from IPPBXs or gateways, and it routes it to the correct server. You want to make sure you configure your IPPBX to point to the CAS, because the mailbox server won't accept calls. It doesn't accept calls directly. you have to point off to your CAS, unless it's on the same server, of course, as your CAS, but you have to point off to your CAS, and your CAS will handle routing that call back to your mailbox server. So the mailbox server has a service called the Microsoft Exchange service, a umservice.exe, as well as a umworkerprocess.exe. And then once the call router hands off the call, it takes it from there. From a performance perspective, you want to use the Exchange 2013 server role requirements calculator for sizing your mailbox server roles and so forth. As far as unified messaging, there's a document on sizing Exchange 2013 deployments. You want to search the Exchange team blog for both of those. But the sizing Exchange 2013 deployments, basically there's a little tiny section in there on unified messaging, and it says that basically it's designed to assume moderate usage. So they don't make special changes to the configuration for performance for unified messaging. They kind of consider that in from a moderate perspective. They don't exactly define what moderate means, though, in the document, so that could be a little frustrating. The recommendation, like 2010, is 100 concurrent calls maximum. Each transcription, if you're using the voicemail transcription, each transcription requires one CPU core, otherwise messages are skipped. Scaling depends on high call concurrency and voicemail transcription concurrency. And you may need to alter server resources or scale back the number of users per server for transcription. Right? It's just something that is part of the deal. You'll know as you start working with it when you start hitting certain thresholds. But you can also look at your metrics and see if you're hitting those points and maybe start altering server resources. Paul, is there anything more you'd like to say on that? I'm just putting you on the spot. Is there any more information on the performance stuff?
If you have more than 100 concurrent calls routinely, then my hat's off to you. I've yet to see anybody who sustains that kind of volume, so I think this is probably all the guidance almost anybody can do.
Great. Does anybody ever think that they have over 100 concurrent calls? We got one guy. Paul, I want you to talk to this guy afterwards. He's waiting for you. He's like me. All right, good stuff. So language packs. Let's talk about these for a minute. All language packs do not offer the same features. How many of you have people in your company that speak multiple languages? To such a degree, I mean, you might have people that speak more than one language, but do you have branch offices in other countries and so forth? Right? Okay. So in that case, you want to look at the language packs because not all language packs offer the same features. Some offer the full package with both an auto attendant, an Outlook voice access transcription, and so forth, and some offer only the auto attendant itself with certain minor features. There are 26 supported languages. So when we look at full feature language packs, this includes pre-recorded prompts, grammar files, text-to-speech translation, automatic speech recognition, and voicemail preview, which only 7 languages currently support voicemail preview, just to let you know. So as far as Outlook voice access transcription, it's handled at the dial plan level. So the cool thing about this is that you can establish multiple dial plans, and you can establish different languages for different dial plans, and then connect users to those plans. Unfortunately, and it's something I complained about directly with the Exchange team on this, is that it would be nice to be able to have the choice in terms of transcription. So, if you have an email coming in, and let's say typically, or voicemail coming in, typically people call in and they speak to you in English, so it gets translated or transcribed for you there, great. But if someone calls in and is speaking another language, and let's say you understand that language, it would be nice if it was able to flip and recognize the language, and I know I'm talking about the future here, but if they recognize the language immediately and then give you the transcription in that language as well. If it could do that, then that would be wonderful. So it's a little narrowed at this point to whatever dial plan has one language, not multiple languages, and it doesn't flip on you, but maybe the next version. For some awesome unified messaging information, we're getting down to we got 15 minutes left. We can answer questions. But if you'd like more information, you can go to, of course, TechNet and the Exchange team. I've got a variety of different training courses, and I'm going to give this one out now. Exchange Server 2010, Unified Messaging. Let's see who's winning this. Bruno Schaub. Bruno? Yes, Bruno. Congratulations. Very good. Excellent. Very good. All right. And again, so these are some of the things here. You can look at some of these different courses. We have an Exchange 2013 Core Solutions course, an Advanced Solutions course coming soon, which will have all of the 2013 content in it for unified messaging. And I really recommend Exchange 2013 Inside Out. Clients, Connectivity, and Unified Messaging from Paul Robichaud, who just left the building there. Where'd he go? But this book isn't available just yet, but it's shaping up to be a fantastic book from what I've read so far. So you want to look for that coming out soon. If you want to contact or follow me, you can read my InfoWorld column on Enterprise Windows at www.infoworld.com. You can email me, peter@trainsignal.com. You can follow me on Twitter at jpbrzezi. I have some of your email addresses, but if any of you didn't put anything in here, didn't get a chance to put in for the raffle, and you want this interactive demo, here, wait, I got to go back one here so that I could show Paul that I promoted his book right in the session. Right? How's that? Very nice. But if anyone would like this interactive demo, again, it's only 25 megs, and I'll just give you a link for it, and you can download it. Just email me, peter@trainsignal.com, okay? And you can follow me on Twitter at jpbrzezi. The other thing, if you want free copies of the book, we're giving 10 free copies away at the eNow booth right after this session. We'll be downstairs. And then after that, actually, I'm going over to the Microsoft booth to answer questions for about 2 hours over at the where they have all the Exchange office. What do they call that? Anybody know? Yeah, the office section in the back of the conference. I'll be there for a couple of hours this afternoon. All right. And these are some track resources they wanted me to post up here. Now, before we end things off here, are there any questions? Shoot.
In terms of the IP gateway, how much of a pain is that to set up? Is that
So, okay, you know, that depends as far as how much you want to get your hands dirty on this. With 2010, I found it actually very simple. It's just, you know, with, you know, I use audio codes. And the interface was pretty simple, but every gateway is a little different. The interfaces, like routers, right? These are all web interfaces, you know, and they're all a little different. I found it to be very easy to do. I had a little bit of trouble with 2013. Things weren't quite working out, and I'm not exactly sure what I did to fix it. But after many, many hours of playing around with it, things started working again. So it really just depends. I think at times, you know, when you have, depending on the number of users you're dealing with and the setup, you might want your telephony people involved. Any other questions? Yes. I couldn't hear anything.
Can you architect Exchange 2010 and UM roles that fell over to a DR data center?
Can you, all right, so I'll repeat that. He's saying, can you make it so that with 2010, that your UM can fail over to another data center? Paul?
Yeah, so UM calls are automatically going to be round robin for you. So you don't technically have to do anything to enable the other 2013 related issue is UM is always a role on the mailbox. The bigger issue is going to be what happens to traffic on the mailbox server or the data center. Get that taken care of. The call router running on either standalone CAS or multi-role CAS will automatically pick up what the UM server.
He's all done. Sorry, he's all done. That's right. I should have gotten you a mic. So for those of you who didn't hear that, you were saying with 2010, it uses DNS round robin, but with 2013, oh, here. Yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't use DNS round robin, but the the routing component of which is what got split out into the call router service in 2013, is automatically smart enough to find multiple servers and round robin between them. So you shouldn't have to do anything explicit to make that work.
All right, very good. Any other questions? In the back there.
Is there a feature in UM that's analogous to a bulletin board? That being that you call in and it doesn't give you the option to leave a message, like movie phone, for instance. You call in, these are the movies of the day, and I don't want to have my customers leave a message.
You could just make an auto attendant with a voice recording that they listen to.
But then what it does is we thought of that, and then what it ended up doing is routing them to the directory to select someone to leave a voicemail when you leave it in the default section. This is 2010.
Good question.
You
Paul?
can do it with a call answering rule.
You're saying you can do it with a call answering rule?
Set up a call answering rule with really no rule behind it. It will apply to every message, and you just have a greeting or recording that goes with that.
Oh, very good. Talk to this guy. Right. He's got over 100 concurrent calls coming in, and he knows how to make the movie phone feature for unified messaging. Don't go anywhere. He's going to catch up with you afterwards. Any other questions? Right there.
My question is more along the lines of the SIP trunks. For us, we have a short cell phone system, and if we PRI fails, our phone carrier can switch our entire trunk to another site, and then our phone system uses DNS mapping to send the calls internally. Does unified messaging support something similar to that, where you can redirect calls through a different PRI trunk?
So I would answer that question, but that just takes away all the fun from Paul here. So Paul, why don't you answer that question?
So remember, all Exchange is going to do is it's going to route calls to whatever PBX you've configured through the IP gateway. So if you have a failover situation like that, whatever your telco provider is doing, as long as the PBX or IP gateway that is talking to knows how to route outbound calls at that point, it'll still work. Exchange doesn't have any concept of what's happening upstream of the gateway, so it doesn't know that your PRI has been moved. It doesn't know that you changed SIP trunking providers. It doesn't have any awareness of any of that. It's all invisible.
And Paul missed the fact that I already explained who Paul was to the audience, so everybody knows that who you are and how awesome you are. So. Yes, very good. Maybe we get you a watch. Maybe like one of these Apple watches that are coming out. Any other questions? Very good. Well, listen. One more.
What's the complexity regarding Link that you're talking about?
It's a different session altogether. He asked what was the complexity regarding Link. We'll talk about that afterwards. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the session. To me, it's a lot of fun to talk about unified messaging. The idea being to try to eliminate some of the fear factor involved, to get it deployed. Somebody said last night at the experts, did anybody go to that experts thing? Right, a few? So somebody said, what's your session on? I said, it's on the deep, dark secrets of unified messaging. And they said, here's the secret, nobody's deploying it. I said, so that's not really a secret, is it, right? But I think that the reason is that folks just aren't aware of the features that are provided. They think that it involves replacing their PBX or IPPBX, and it might, but they have a lot of fear involved. It touches telephony things. There are terms involved they've never worked with before. And so rather than make it where it's a whole new career for you, the idea is not for it to become a whole new career, but rather for it to simply be something that you integrate into what you already know. Yes, you need to know a few new things, but hey, that's part of the job, isn't it? So again, I hope everybody enjoyed the session, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.